Stephen retired after I did. Oh, yeah. No.
Yep.
I think so.
Okay, so now we're live. You can use your home button.
It's not this one though, right now.
I don't think it matters where you point it. And then yep, you can use your, and then just dot it. Okay, so now we are live.
Where'd your tea go?
Let me know if you see a charcoal
Very responsible.
because Paul's application's first up,
Letting it cool.
Okay.
and he did say he was going to be here.
For the seniors housing.
Spring, do you want me to call on you for context on some of these as I call the like B3 2022? Do you want to have a quick opportunity just to give some context to what we're talking about?
Yep, I can.
I think it also helps
Yep.
public that are watching, the
Yep.
hundreds of people that are going to be tuning in.
Absolutely, I can.
All right, 6 o'clock. Okay, so I'll call the meeting to order. Good evening, everyone, and I'd like to welcome everyone that has come to participate in the meeting and or observe the meeting tonight in the audience, and to those that are watching us online. I appreciate you being here and tuning in for all of the excitement. We have somebody in the waiting room. We'll let them in. So we'll have a motion to open the meeting. Do I have it? Is it? Oh, that's okay. I'll look for a mover and a seconder. Moved by member Foisey, seconded by member Paquette. That the Planning Advisory Committee meeting be opened at 6 p.m. All in favor? It's carried. Adoption of the minutes for the regular meeting from April 4th, 2023. I have a motion here. I'll look for a mover and a seconder to approve those minutes. Moved by member Orlowski, seconded by member Langlois, that the minutes of the Planning Advisory Committee meeting held April 4th, 2023 be adopted as circulated. All in favor? Any questions or comments, by the way? Thank you. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest this evening on any of the matters?
Yeah, because I am a board member of the Bonfields non-for-profit seniors housing.
Excellent. We'll make a note of that. And I believe you have also filled out a conflict of interest form. Wonderful. I don't think I need to sign, but if you want to,
No.
Wonderful. Any other disclosures? Seeing none, we'll move into presentations from the public. If there are any at-large presentations, there are none.
No, we'll just go through as we speak. To
Yeah,
the
for sure.
applications.
Moving into consent applications B3 2022, which is about the not-for-profit seniors housing corporation. So are you going to be stepping out?
Yeah, as soon as you read the
Wonderful.
motion,
Oh my goodness.
just the first.
So we'll look for a mover and a seconder on a very long motion that I would then read at the table. So moved by member Woblowski, seconded by member Paquette. That the Planning Advisory Committee recommends to Council that consent application B3 2022 community not-for-profit seniors housing Bonfield for the creation of one new lot be approved with the following conditions.
I'll be leaving it.
Wonderful.
Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
Are you telling me I don't need to read all this?
Or Mr. Goodridge just came in. He's the agent on the file.
Good evening, sir.
If we want to just let him maybe speak to it first.
Absolutely. Well, I'll read it, put it on the table, and then we can speak to it and then go from there. So that this approval applies to the transfer as applied for, which shows 1 new lot on part of lot 11, concession 7, part 1, 36R 8176. 2, that the following documents be provided: the original executed transfer or deed, a duplicate original and one photocopy for our records. B, a copy of the survey plan deposited in the land titles office if required. C, an electronic copy of the survey emailed to planning@bonfieldtownship.com. D, a schedule describing this severed parcel attached to the transfer for approval purposes. 3, if this is a forced road situation, a 20-meter road allowance or whichever amount is required for road purposes shall be transferred to the municipality at the owner's expense across the whole lot or parcel of which the severance was taken, and compensation shall be awarded as per the compensation grid for the transfer of forced roads. 4, that the building setbacks for all buildings must meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw for the retained and or severed lots, whichever are affected at the time of the survey. 5, a fee of 5% in lieu of the parkland dedication for each transfer document shall be deposited in the office of the clerk prior to the stamping of any transfer document regarding a subdivision or a consent for each new lot. For the purpose of determining the amount of payment, the pay grid to determine payment of up to 5% in lieu of the land be conveyed for park or other recreational purposes shall apply. 6, if any, all tax arrears must be paid prior to the stamping of the transfer deeds for a new lot. 7, the applicant enter into a consent agreement with the Township of Bonfield at their expense to include provisions for the orderly development of the township's road allowance known as Eric Street, and shall also incorporate the requirements as noted in the site hydrogeology assessment study dated September 9th, 2022, conducted by Miller and Urso Surveying Inc., project number 7371. Notes. A certificate of approval as required under Ontario Regulation 33212 of the Ontario Building Code Act for the sewage disposal system must be obtained prior to the development of the property. A development interference with wetlands and alteration to shorelines and watercourse permit may be required from the North Bay Mattawa Conservation Authority prior to the undertaking any development of the property. It is recommended that prior to development, the property owner consult with the MNRF regarding potential requirements under the Endangered Species Act. Okay. No, so that we have a mover and a seconder. That's what's on the floor. Mr. Goodridge, would you like to speak to this?
Only if there's any questions. It's been quite a journey bringing it.
It sure has.
As everyone's aware of, the property, each both the severed and the retained meet all the minimum standards. The biggest sticking point was the Hydro G study and the need for the septic system to accommodate the type of structures that we're putting in. The developer and their I guess the developer as Descon, the constructor, I should say, has agreed to put in the more efficient septic systems. It's now all been approved by the Conservation Authority. So at this point, we're now ready to go, and we'll work with staff to look at the consent agreement for provision of the road.
Excellent. Any questions or comments?
No, I'm good.
I think I just have a comment to thank those that have been involved in this. You're not wrong. This has been quite the journey. This is a great step forward for our municipality to get the seniors housing, the second phase of senior housing and the first phase to be able to open up. So this is a big step tonight. So I'll just call the vote. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. We got Member Foisey back.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
I was just starting to enjoy myself.
You'll have more fun in here.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, welcome back. We'll move on to consent application B4 2023 for Mr. James Ron.
Yeah, so there's- pass up the two.
We have a couple of options on that we can consider from a committee standpoint, but perhaps we will perhaps we'll open it up for conversation or context. I don't know if Manager Green, you want to say anything on this, or if Mr. Goodrich, I believe you are also representing. If you have opening comments you'd like to make on this, you're more than welcome.
Well, opening comments. I didn't want to say much on the last one so that I could save my voice for this one. The municipality's policy is that only 3 severances be granted out of a rural lot. We understand that, and then that's in your official plan that came in 2013. Unfortunately for Mr. Ron, he acquired the land south of the road allowance. So initially, perhaps with reference to the mapping,
Yeah, please.
Mr. Ron owns the piece.
If you'd like to,
Up here.
we'd like to join you. Welcome to come to the table. Yeah. Seems like you have quite the file. We might be here for a bit. Yeah.
Don't get nervous. I'm not going to read the whole thing.
Okay.
Just the first 3 quarters. James Ron owned the lands north of the road allowance, including the pond area. In 2012, he purchased a strip of land north of the road between the road and the road allowance. And in 2012, he also purchased the road allowance itself. Subsequent to that, he applied for and received severance consent for 3 lots. Had your official plan come in a year sooner, he would have actually qualified for 3 from this piece as well as 3 from the above. But unfortunately, that's not the case, and he put everything in the same name, so it merged together on title. In hindsight, probably would have been better to have kept them in a separate ownership, as the policies always would have permitted the additional lots. In addition to that, the official plan policy also allows for infilling severances. Now, it doesn't make reference to the infilling severances. Typically, those are outside of the maximum number, but your official plan is silent on that regard. So infilling is typically if you have residential development already established in the neighborhood, and we're simply infilling between those uses, that would be permissible also. So even though we don't fit the requirement of the minimum or the maximum of 3, do we still qualify as an infilling lot or 2? And as the case may be here. Also, your official plan allows for rural subdivisions of a maximum of 5 lots. Now, but it also further states, sorry, let me just get the quote. So a maximum of 5 lots shall be created through individual country lot subdivision. However, the consent policies later say that consents may be granted when a plan of subdivision or plan of condominium is not required for the orderly development of the land. And this is the more important part, or the provision of services. Typically, you only do a subdivision so that you can enter into a subdivision agreement. A subdivision agreement is a financial contract between the developer and the municipality to make sure that the roads, the water lines, the sanitary sewers, or whatever, are constructed in accordance with the engineering design. And the developer puts up a letter of credit to that effect. And so that if they don't follow through on their commitment for whatever reason, they die, they walk away from it, whatever the reason, the municipality takes that letter of credit, takes that money, hires a local contractor to come in and finish the work for the people that have already purchased the lots. So in a case like this, we're not providing any services. We're well outside of the service area. There's no water lines. We're not putting in sanitary sewers, and we're already on an existing municipal road. I can't see how anyone could do a 5-lot rural subdivision if you had to build a road to do it. Just the cost would be so prohibitive for the number of lots. So already the official plan more or less contemplates that if we're creating 5 lots, basically they have to be along an existing road. You just can't do it otherwise. Not unless they back onto a lake or to a river where there's a value-added component. We talk a lot of people that come into us that want to do rural subdivisions. And we kind of point out, here's what the costs are to build the road, here's what the value of the land is. It just isn't feasible. So in a case like this, your official plan does allow for the creation of up to 5 lots in a rural subdivision. In this case, we've created 3 of them already by severance. We're asking for 2 additional lots, bringing us up to the maximum of 5 as permitted under the official plan. But we're saying instead of by way of subdivision, because there's no servicing involved, why don't we do this through the consent process? So that's the other part of this one as well. In terms of fitting in with the nature and character of development in the area, we've got 9 lots created. This is Jim Ron's property over here. He currently holds the lands north of the road allowance in 3 separate pins. They're all in the same name, so they've all merged together. But on this side, you can see all of the different lots. I believe we have 9 different lots on this side. We have 9 different lots. Kitty corner here. We have 5 lots on the lands immediately to the southwest. So in this neighborhood, we already have that type of development. So it's not unprecedented. It's in keeping with the general nature and character of development. There were some items, and Sabrina, I'm sorry, I found them now, but I missed your emails asking for the MDS calculation, and I was a little bit delayed this evening getting here simply because I was running those off once I found your requests for them. The only agricultural operation that could be closely impacted, and I'll go back to my other colored. So I've looked at where they are, and apparently if they're within 750 meters, we need to do an MDS calculation. This one, I still have to do an MDS on this one. I took the closest approach, which is the equestrian facility just immediately to the southeast. If I consider this as being, and it all comes down to the size of the barn, the housing capacity of the barn, because it's dealing with collection of manure all in one place. And that's the impact. We don't have any setback distances for residential uses to pasture land. It's only where the storage of manure would occur. So if we consider this as just 2 new severances, as opposed to the 5, if we consider it 2, then it's a type A land use, which is a rural limited lot creation. And the setback distance for this structure works out to be 104 meters. But in effect, we're creating 5 lots on this lot. So I also ran the numbers based on if we were doing this as a 5-lot subdivision. So anytime it's 4 or more severances, then it bumps you into what's called a type B land use. The type B land use is basically double that requirement, so that the minimum setback distance is 208 meters. depending how you measure it, I'm taking it from the barn to just inside the lot corner here. We're actually at 254 meters, and where the house would actually be constructed, we're probably, closer to maybe 270, 280 meters. I still need to do it for the potential cattle operation to the south here, but excuse me. In this area, I haven't seen any barns big enough that would generate, and I've been doing these MDS calculations for 30 years. I've never seen a barn in this area big enough that would generate a setback distance in excess of this 592 meters that I would measure to the start of the first lot. I can still run those and provide that as a condition of approval. I did find the one aggregate operation. I wasn't sure, Sabrina, where the second aggregate operation was, unless it's this little area, but
There's some over zoned in our official plan up here.
okay, that it could be extracted. Okay, so we'd have to look at that. The MOE or MECP, they're now called, have published a series of guidelines for land use compatibility. In this particular case, it's the D6 series guidelines that establish buffer distances between heavy industrial, well, between any industrial use, but an aggregate operation is classified as class 3, which is the heaviest industrial use. They impose a 300 meter buffer between a heavy industrial use, such as an aggregate operation, and a sensitive land use. And just judging by the distances that we have here, it's 500 meters approximately. It's a kilometer from here to here. The full depth of a concession in Bonfield theoretically is 1,006 meters, a little over a kilometer. If the aggregate operation is up here, half that distance is 500, a third would be the 300, which would still just bring us on to the far side of the pond, and our proposed lots are well beyond that area. The aggregate operation to the west is 723 meters from the nearest proposed lot. So I think we have lots of coverage that way. I did check the barn area to the north, but we're 1.2 kilometers away. We're well outside of any MDS calculation that would be required for that particular facility. So there is still one outstanding, admittedly. I guess if 750 is the criteria, we should look at this one as well. But like I say, I've never seen, and neither of these barns are, I don't think, are big enough to generate that sort of a setback distance. We do these with, once again, just simply with Google Maps. If we're very close to the minimum distance requirement, then I'll do a site investigation. I'll meet with the local farmer, and we'll actually physically measure the barn area, and we'll measure the actual housing capacity that's in there, and also figure out what it is they're using it for. I'm pretty sure this is equestrian. This one, I didn't see any use of animals, but with the pasture lands on both of these, I'm assuming they would be dairy operations. Not dairy, sorry, beef cattle operations, unless there is a dairy farm still in the area. There's not that many left, I don't think, around. But mostly in this area, the bigger barns are for beef cattle. But it depends. They may have sheep, they may have whatever. But like I say, I've never seen a setback distance for any of the barns throughout this area, Verner area, Sudbury East as well included, where the farming operations are typically a little larger than what they are in Bonfield. Like I said, I've never seen a setback that would be in excess of the distances already shown, but we can confirm that. Typically as well, you take 20% of the barn size off for hallways, feed rooms, tack rooms, whatever. There were two structures on the equestrian farm, both 110 square meters in size. I assume I only took 20% out of the one, because if you're going to have a feed room, you'll have all your feet together in one spot, same as your back rooms. So I assume that the whole of the second barn would be used for housing the livestock, and that 80% of the other barn would be available for housing. So I think I've kind of done it as a worst case scenario, and I've looked at it as a worst case scenario as if we were creating 5 lots today as opposed to just the 2. If there's any questions, see what I meant about saving my voice for this one? If there's any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them for you.
Any questions from the committee members?
Maybe just a comment that the official plan doesn't not straight out for the severance. If you go around about, then you could probably see that it may comply, but straight out the official plan and make provisions for that.
Right.
And with respect to the MDS, that would, before we move forward, that is something that before any decision would be made, we would have to, you'd have to be ensured that that is in conforms as well. There's lots to think about. You gave us lots to think about. And before we made any decision either way, I'd like to ask the chair if we could defer it and give our staff more time to look at it.
Absolutely. One of the other things you might want to look at in your official plan too, with respect to consent, like in that same section where it says about a plan of subdivision, consents may be granted. It also says no further consents may be granted for any previously severed or retained parcels within the township. So what that means is, for example, I've got 2 daughters. So on my farm right now, we're looking to sever a lot for my daughter and her fiance so they can build. But if my other daughter who lives out in North Vancouver phoned me up tomorrow and said, Paul, I'd like to move back home, and we didn't want to give up any more land on the farm, we'd probably talk to Lauren and say, look, we're going to split your lot in 2, half for you, half for your daughter. If I was in Bonfield, that policy says I can't do that because it says there's no further severances. Even though it allows for a maximum of 3 by way of a consent, the policy, if you read it strictly by the letter of what's written, says that you're not allowed to do any more severances if a severance on either the severed lot or on the retained lot. So there's a few things in the policy, and I know you can't write a policy for every situation, and they're difficult policies to read, but that same section of the policy also doesn't address, well, can we do 3 by way of severance consent? If we want any more, do we have to go subdivision? Does it permit subdivision of an additional 5? Does it allow you to create 8 lots out of a lot? So there's lots in the official plan that it really doesn't specifically, and it can't speak to every situation, but it's also silent on those issues. So what I'm saying is, let's not push the limit with the 8, but it does allow for the creation of up to 5. If we really don't need a subdivision and a subdivision agreement, let's just do it by way of consent.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. Did I see that there's another presentation or comment that needs to be? Sure, go ahead.
Oh, I didn't get any written submissions in because I was under the impression there were 14 days from the first time it was set out. Now, I didn't get the 14 days, but that isn't immaterial. I'm going to say what I would like to say here. Now, Mr. Goodrich was talking about aggregate area. I own the aggregate area up Trout Pond Road. And I also own part of the property that he's retaining across the road. And part of that is zoned agriculture and the other part is aggregate. And I own both sides of the road. And in fact, under the Aggregates Act, I own the material underneath the road, whereas Forest Road going around my hill. But that is immaterial on this here. But what I would like to say on that severance is on them 2 lots, over there he's talking about. All that area, all the rock going right up to the ones past Sever there, all that weeps down into that pond that he's fabricated over the years. And that goes down through and abuts my property and the piece he's got in the swamp. Now, I don't know if there's been any assessment on all that, because all that ground, because that's solid rock all up on Trunk Road. And the reason why I didn't comment and get around to it, and I don't want to nitpick on you, Paul.
No, no problem.
And the way it was sent out from Katrina is these lots were to be severed off Trout Pond Road. These are not on Trout Pond Road. Only one corner is on Trout Pond Road. And as the map's drawn here, just to point out to you, this here, down here is the Trunk Road. Trout Pond is here.
Is that road? Yeah, this is Trunk.
And this is Trunk.
Yeah.
So none, only the one on the corner is off Trout Pond Road. But all this here area up here, this one here, all this area here is solid rock in here. And this area, I don't know what the overburden is, but all that weeps all down through into this pond and comes down to the corner of the, and I own lot 21 over here, and I own over here.
Okay.
And furthermore, then if the lots are severed off and it goes ahead with council and planning board and everything else, they want to be prepared that there's going to be noise, because across the road, which was the old Johnny Doolittle property, there's a crusher there, and there's tentatively being a crusher going in here.
Right.
Now, the guy I was talking to on the phone the other night that wants to get in there and crush, I said to him, he said, we'll clear that whole hill out. I said, you got a noise bylaw 7 to 7. He said, yeah. But he said, we can work 24 hours a day. I said, how would you do that? Because he said, we'll crush 7 to 7 and we'll haul 7 to 7.
Okay.
And he said, they can't stop. So just for information for you, I hope you all want to consider that.
Appreciate that.
But the one that's important here is the environment here. On these lots all draining back into the pond.
Correct. The lots that were already created, the 3, we had set aside building areas at the front. There is an area at the front of each of those original 3 lots, and I imagine be the same on this, as well as a building area up in the northeast end of the severed 2. We had, perhaps I can show you, this was a document. This file goes back a long way, but so for example, the hydro line goes across the old road allowance. There is an easement for the hydro line, but what we were looking at doing was making sure that there was, and this was so that we could send this off to the Conservation Authority, that we could identify a building area on each of the fronts of the 3 original lots, plus a mantle area for the septics, so that the bedrock. Now, if we are on bedrock, we can still bring in fill for the septics. But you're correct. There is a high rise. It's almost a cliff in spots here to get up onto the rock.
Right.
And then from there, it drains off to the
These
north.
here will all drain back to that outcrop of rock
Yes,
and then go down into the pond here.
correct.
There's no other way because
Right.
it all goes down from there.
But the building sites on these would all be at the front on Trunk Road. And then they wouldn't be up on the
Not
rock
on Trout
section.
Pond.
On Trout Pond, it would be over here on Trunk Road. Yes, the building sites are here at the front. The rock at the back will stay in a natural state. So the water from here drains through the road system. This one will drain down through the road system. And you're right, eventually we'll get into that man-made pond.
And there's a bunch of false fill all in here.
Okay. And I'm not sure what,
Well,
Mr.
I
Ron's
know it
doing
was
with
drawn
that.
in by the township last year when they were ditching on some of the roads and on the 3rd line here, and it's all down false fill. And all that is gonna weep through there, which is gonna be next to nothing for weeping,
Okay,
just for information for you. And, like I say, on the noise bylaw, or when he wants to sell these properties here, he may have 2 crushers sitting up over there crushing all day long.
and we already have a number of houses in far closer proximity than what we've
Sure.
got here.
And there's 2 right in here. There's two houses right here, which is a budding corner number 9, concession 9, and then one over the hill
Right,
over to the other farm.
right. And on the aggregate license for the extraction and the crushing, have they put any provisions in there where the crusher would be located?
No, because the
typically-
whole hill is gravel.
Right, but typically
have all that
there's provisions
particulars
in
at
the,
home.
yeah,
I have all
Okay.
in particular at home. It hasn't been active the last couple of years because nobody had any money. And it costs money to enter.
absolutely.
Costs you 25,000 a year just before you put out B ground.
Right.
The truck and insurance, all that stuff.
Yep,
Okay,
yep. We had an old pit on our farm that we let go because it was pretty much depleted. But so I've gone through all that myself too on our own properties.
Because over here on lot 21 and over here, I own both sides of the road.
Mhm. But the MNRF who looks after the aggregate
Oh, I
licenses,
deal
yeah,
with-
I'm sure you do. Probably Ramey LaBreche if
Right.
he's still there. But they will sort of dictate as well where any of these heavy uses, the crushers and whatnot are to be placed on the site to try to mitigate the sound on the abutting property owners.
And the thing is, there should, anybody that's building up in close to that is gonna have to be prepared, because they'll be having a war like they did down at Powassan, when the crushing was on there last year for Maple Road. With dust, noise, whatever.
okay. Thank you, gentlemen. And sorry, sir, I didn't catch your name.
George Cook.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your presentation. So I think at this point, Member Paquette has asked to defer this matter for more information. I don't know if any committee member is opposed to that. And we would need a motion to defer, or are we able to just?
I believe the second one would be appropriate.
Okay. So the motion, I'll read it first and I'll look for mover and seconder, is that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends to council that the consent application B4 2023, Ron, James, be deferred back to the applicant to provide additional information to be determined by the staff and as provided in section 7.10.3 of Bonfield's official plan. Can I get a mover and a seconder on that? Moved by Member Paquette. Do we have a seconder to put that on the floor? Moved by, or seconded by Member Poisey. Any questions or comments on the deferral at this point? All in favor? Okay. I'd like to thank the 2 gentlemen again for your presentation. It was very well presented, so thank you very much. Moving on to C, which is a consent application B1 2023, Mr. Perot.
Yep, and I believe he's over Zoom. Yeah.
Excellent. So, oh my goodness, we have another very, very long
They're all
motion
like
here.
that.
I'll read it and then I'll look for mover in a second. So that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends to council that consent application B1 2023 Perot Dominic for the creation of 1 new lot be approved with the following conditions. 1, that this approval applies to the transfer as applied for, which shows 1 new lot from concession 4, lot 27, Boxwell Road. 2, that the following documents be provided. A, the original executed transfer or deed, a duplicate original and 1 photocopy for our records. B, a copy of the survey plan deposited to the land titles office if required. C, an electronic copy of the survey email to planning@bonfieldtownship.com. D, a schedule describing the severed parcel attached to the transfer for approval purposes. 3, if there is forced road situation, a 20-meter road allowance or whichever amount is required for road purposes shall be transferred to the municipality at the owner's expense across the whole lot or parcel for which the severance was taken, and compensation shall be awarded as per the compensation grid for the transfer of forced roads. 4, that the building setbacks for all buildings must meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw for the retained and or severed lots, whichever are affected at the time of survey. 5, a fee of 5% in lieu of parkland dedication for each transfer document shall be deposited in the office of the clerk prior to stamping of any transfer document regarding a subdivision or consent for each new lot. For the purpose of determining the amount of payment, the pay grid to determine payment of up to 5% in lieu of land to be conveyed for park or other recreational purposes shall apply. 6, if any, all taxes arrears must be paid prior to the stamping of transfer documents for the new lot. Of note, a certificate of approval as required under Ontario Regulation 33212 of the Ontario Building Code Act for the sewage disposal system must be obtained prior to the development of the property. And a development interference with the wetlands and alteration of shorelines and water courses permit may be required from the North Bay Mattawa Conservation Authority prior to undertaking any development of the property. It is recommended that prior to development, the property owner consult with MRNRF regarding potential requirements under the Endangered Species Act. I will look for a mover and a seconder on that motion. Moved by Member Waropolowski, seconded by Member Langlois. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. Moving on to D, which is B3 2023, Chadburn, Lorraine, and Dennis.
Leanne,
Sorry?
Leanne and Dennis.
Oh, what,
You
did
said Lorraine.
I really? It says Leanne on here. That's just poor reading on my part. Sorry about
It's
that.
okay.
Okay, so I'll look for a mover and a second after I read it. So that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends to Council that the consent application B3 2023, Chadburn, Dennis, and Leanne for the creation of 2 new lots be approved for the following conditions. 1, this approval applies to the transfer as applied for, which shows 2 new lots from concession 8, lot 25, except parts 1 and 2, 36R 8158, 339 Fischel Road. That the following documents be provided: A, in original executed transfer or deed, a duplicate original and a photocopy for our records. B, a copy of the survey plan deposited in the land titles office if required. C, an electronic copy of the survey emailed to planning@bonfieldtownship.com. D, a schedule describing the severed parcel attached to the transfer for approval purposes. 3, if there is a forced road situation, a 20-meter road allowance or whichever amount is required for road purposes shall be transferred to the municipality at the owner's expense across the whole lot or parcel for which the severance was taken, and compensation shall be awarded as per the compensation grid for the transfer of forced roads. 4, the building setbacks for all buildings must meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw for the retained and or severed lots, whichever are affected at the time of survey. 5, a fee of 5% in lieu of parkland dedication for each transfer document shall be deposited in the office of the clerk prior to the stamping of any transfer document regarding a subdivision or a consent for each new lot. For the purpose of determining the amount of payment, a pay grid, the pay grid to determine payment of up to 5% in lieu of the land be conveyed for park or other recreational purposes shall apply. 6, if any, all tax arrears must be paid prior to the stamping of transfer documents for a new lot. Of note, a certificate of approval as required under Ontario Regulation 33212 of the Ontario Building Code Act for the sewage disposal system must be obtained prior to development of the property. A development interference with wetlands and alteration to shorelines and wet courses permit may be required from the North Bay Mattawa Conservation Authority prior to undertaking any development of the property. It is recommended that prior to the development, property owner consult with the MNRF regarding potential requirements under the Endangered Species Act. An entrance permit may be required from the Township of Bonfield Public Works Department prior to the development of the property, and no further lots shall be created under consent in accordance with the policy 711.2.2 of Bonfield's current official plan. I'll look for a mover and a second to go on the table. Member Paquette, seconded by Member Foisey. Any questions or comments and at all? And do you have nothing to say? No questions, comments? All in favor? That's carried. Okay. Do you have any more essays to read tonight, or is that?
No, that's it.
Excellent. So moving to other business. So the June Planning Advisory Committee meeting will be rescheduled to June 20th. And the July Planning Advisory Committee meeting is canceled. If anything of urgency comes up, we will follow protocol to call a special meeting. But hopefully nothing of that urgent will come forward. And under unfinished business, so Bill 23, canvassing options for review, report to council for RFP for services. Manager Green, did you want to?
Well, there's a report going to the next council meeting to request to execute a request for a proposal for a consulting firm.
Okay. So that was just an information item, and we have moved to the agenda. Or to the adjournment. Jeez,
Okay.
I think I've read too much. No?
I thought we were starting over.
Yeah. Look for a mover and a seconder for adjournment. Moved by Member Woblowski. Seconded by Member Langlois. That the Planning Advisory Committee be adjourned at 6:45 p.m. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a lovely evening.
Bye, Gina.
Thanks.